It was an ordinary evening when Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a senior scientist at the Earth Space Observation Center, first noticed the anomaly. The day had been filled with the usual routine of scanning signals from distant stars and cataloging random cosmic events. But then, deep in the static of the vast expanse, something strange appeared. A sequence of bursts, regular, rhythmic, and deliberate. At first, it seemed like an interference glitch. Yet, when Evelyn isolated the frequency, she felt a chill run down her spine. For hours, she analyzed the pattern, looping it over and over, her fingers shaking slightly as she adjusted the equipment. The signal wasn't random. It was purposeful, complex, like an encrypted message or a code. The pattern resembled nothing she had ever seen before. Her eyes widened as the signal's frequency adjusted and a hidden message began to surface. The transmission, although faint, was a cry from somewhere deep in the stars. The very same kind of signal humanity had been searching for years, signs of alien intelligence. She pulled up a direct line to Dr. Nathaniel Hayes, a renowned expert in extraterrestrial communications. "I think you need to see this," she said, her voice low and tense. "It's not just noise. It's a message." Nathaniel appeared on the other end of the screen a few moments later, his face unreadable. He quickly took a seat, studied the data, and didn't speak for a long time. The silence was filled with growing unease. "Is it?" Evelyn started, but he raised a hand, urging her to be quiet. "I need to confirm something first," Nathaniel murmured, adjusting the readings. He stared at the signal as it flickered across his screen. Each burst seemed to pulse with intent. His hand hovered over the keyboard before he spoke again. "It's real. It's not some natural phenomenon. Evelyn, this is a communication. A message." He paused, looking at her. "And the most disturbing part is, it's not just any message. It's targeted. At us." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. But who would be sending this? Where? Nathaniel's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. "Somewhere. Far away. And it's not a friendly message." The room around them seemed to darken as they both stared at the screen. The signals were unmistakably directed at Earth. A low, haunting hum filled the background of the signal, a sinister tone that almost seemed to vibrate through their bones. It was unlike any transmission from a known source. Hours passed. As the signal repeated itself, the scientists worked tirelessly, trying to decode it. The bursts were more than simple code. They seemed to be designed to test the limits of their understanding. And then, at the very end of the transmission, the final, chilling message came through. "We are coming to test your species' limits. Prepare." Evelyn recoiled as the words echoed in her mind. The message was direct, cold, a warning. It felt like an ultimatum. There was no ambiguity. Whoever sent this had no interest in diplomacy or peaceful exchange. They were coming, and they were testing Earth, testing humanity. The data was shared with top officials immediately. By the next morning, Earth's military and scientific councils were convening in emergency meetings. The signal had been analyzed, and the situation was clear. Humanity had just been noticed by an alien force, and this force wasn't here to make friends. The world was on edge as governments and military forces across the globe scrambled to prepare. Earth had received many signals over the decades, but none like this. This wasn't a call for peace. It was a challenge. And as the sun set over the horizon, humanity's fight for survival began to take shape. Evelyn stared out the window of the observatory, her mind racing. What kind of beings were out there? And what did they mean by testing humanity? Deep down, she knew something terrible was coming, but she had no idea how soon it would arrive. The panic spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours of the transmission's arrival, the world's leaders were on high alert. Governments scrambled to form emergency coalitions, and military bases across the globe began to prepare for an unknown threat. But despite the urgency, no one had answers, only questions. The signal had provided no clues as to the identity of the enemy, their numbers, or their intentions. It simply stated, "We are coming to test your species' limits. Prepare." By midnight, the first emergency meeting of Earth's top leaders was underway. The United Nations convened an extraordinary session in New York, with representatives from every nation dialing in. The room was tense as military officials and intelligence experts reviewed the data. A large screen displayed the signal, the ominous words still fresh in their minds. No one had ever faced a situation like this. A mysterious alien force, seemingly far superior, was threatening their very existence. How should humanity respond? In a secure underground bunker in Geneva, military commanders gathered to discuss the immediate next steps. The threat was clear. Earth had been targeted. The Zorath, if that's what they were called, weren't here for diplomacy. They had made that much clear. The room filled with heated voices as commanders argued over what to do next. "We can't just sit and wait," General Sarah Clark, head of Earth's defense forces, said sharply. "They'll come for us, whether we're ready or not. We need to strike first, take the initiative, show them that we won't be intimidated." "Strike first." A voice from the European delegation cut in. "With what? We've never seen ships like theirs. They could have weapons that make our military look like children's toys." "We have to defend ourselves," Clark insisted. "We don't know what they're capable of, but we do know they intend to test us. If we don't act now, we risk being wiped out before we can even fight back." The discussion grew more chaotic as leaders and officials from around the world argued their points. Finally, President Eleanor Ford, leader of the United States and head of the Earth Security Council, raised her hand for silence. She had been listening carefully, weighing every word. When the room grew quiet, her voice rang out with authority. "We are faced with a choice," she began, her tone calm but heavy with the weight of the moment. "We can continue to argue and hope that this is some kind of misunderstanding, or we can prepare ourselves for what's coming. I say we prepare. We cannot afford to sit idly by. We don't know when the next signal will come or what it will say. But we do know this. We must act. For humanity's sake." The room fell silent as her words sank in. The decision was clear, but it wasn't easy. Earth's military was strong, but they were no match for an unknown alien force that could be far more advanced. Yet, in that silence, one truth became apparent to everyone present. Waiting was not an option. The Zorath had issued a challenge, and the world had to respond. With that, President Ford issued an executive order: activate Earth's war fleet. The fleet had been built decades ago as part of a failed effort to assert Earth's dominance in the space race. Massive warships, designed for exploration and defense, had been repurposed into the most advanced fighting force humanity had ever assembled. But the fleet had never been used. It had remained in the dark corners of Earth's military history, dormant and untouched. Now, it would be their only hope. The call went out immediately. Earth's top commanders and military engineers were summoned to the fleet's command center, located in a remote space station just outside Earth's atmosphere. As the ships began to power up, many of the veteran crews, long retired, were called back into service. They had trained for decades for something that, at the time, seemed like a distant possibility. Now, it was a reality. Commander Amelia Ruiz, a battle-hardened veteran, was selected to lead the fleet. She had seen her fair share of wars and conflicts, but nothing like this. Humanity was about to face an unknown enemy in a war that could decide their survival. She stood before her crew, a mix of young and old, professionals and amateurs, ready to take on a challenge unlike any they had ever faced. The fleet was ready. The only question now was whether humanity's best would be enough. The order was given. Earth's war fleet began to assemble. And with it, the world held its breath. The first true test of humanity's strength was about to begin. The massive, silent ships of Earth's war fleet began to hum with life as they powered up, one by one. The fleet had remained dormant for decades, hidden in a remote orbit just outside Earth's atmosphere. Originally designed for exploratory missions to the farthest reaches of space, these vessels had been retrofitted into formidable war machines, yet they had never seen battle. Now, their time had come. Commander Amelia Ruiz stood at the command center, her face set in grim determination. She had trained for this moment her entire life, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. Earth's survival depended on her decisions, her leadership. The fleet's readiness, its performance in the coming conflict, would decide whether humanity would survive or be wiped from the galaxy. The crew members, most of whom had been pulled from civilian life or from years of retirement, were busy preparing their stations. Each person was a part of a finely tuned machine, a mix of seasoned soldiers, engineers, and scientists, all with the singular goal of protecting Earth. Some faces were familiar to Ruiz, others were new, but all had one thing in common. They were united in the belief that they had no choice but to fight. Status report. Ruiz barked, turning toward her chief engineer, Lieutenant Kyle Renner. Renner, a man whose calm demeanor had earned him respect among the crew, looked up from the console in front of him. All systems are operational, Commander. Shields are at full power, weapons are calibrated, and AI protocols are running as planned. The fleet is ready for deployment. Ruiz nodded, but she couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. The fleet's weaponry was cutting edge, but nothing on Earth had ever faced an enemy like the Joreth. She had seen the analysis. This alien force was powerful, with ships that could destroy entire fleets with a single shot. How could Earth stand a chance? Commander, we've received a communication from Earth's High Command, said Lieutenant Sarah Lai, the fleet's communications officer. She handed Ruiz a tablet, showing a message from President Eleanor Ford herself. The message was clear. The fate of Earth is in your hands. We trust you, Commander. Do not fail us. Ruiz let the message sink in. The weight of her responsibility grew heavier with each passing second. She turned to the window of the command deck, gazing out at the fleet. It was a sight to behold. 12 massive ships, each more than a kilometer long, equipped with powerful energy weapons and defensive shields. They were humanity's last line of defense. But would it be enough? At that moment, a voice crackled over the intercom, breaking her thoughts. Commander, the first wave of Joreth ships have entered our detection range. They're coming in fast, with no sign of slowing down. Ruiz's heart skipped a beat. The time had come. She turned to face her crew, her voice steady, but filled with urgency. Prepare for battle. Helm, take us to the front lines. Weapons officer, bring up the main guns. The crew sprang into action, a practiced chaos of movement. For the next few moments, Ruiz's mind was a blur of commands and calculations. She focused on the task at hand, pushing aside the fear that clawed at her. This was what they had trained for. They had no choice but to fight. As the fleet left Earth's orbit and moved toward the enemy, Ruiz couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. These ships, designed for exploration, were now humanity's most powerful weapon. Their weapons were still untested in actual combat, and their AI systems had only been trained in simulations. But they had one advantage: humanity's resolve. Earth would fight back, no matter the odds. The massive Joreth ships loomed ahead, dark and imposing against the stars. Their silhouettes were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, sleek, almost organic in their design, with weapons that pulsed with deadly energy. The alien ships didn't communicate, nor did they hesitate. They were here for one purpose: to test humanity. Engage the enemy, Ruiz ordered, her voice unwavering. The war fleet fired its first shots in anger. Earth's ships launched a volley of energy blasts, their beams slicing through space with precision. The enemy retaliated, unleashing waves of deadly fire from their colossal weapons. For a moment, it felt like a hopeless battle. The Joreth ships were enormous, their firepower overwhelming. But Earth's fleet wasn't finished. Ruiz knew they had to outsmart the enemy, not just overpower them. Helm, perform evasive maneuvers, she barked. Weapons, focus on their command ship. We need to cripple their coordination. The battle had begun, and it was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced. Yet, in that chaos, one thing became clear. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The first battle with the Joreth was not what Commander Amelia Ruiz had expected. The moment Earth's war fleet engaged, the magnitude of the situation became all too real. Despite their advanced weaponry and their superior numbers, the Joreth were not merely opponents, they were predators. Their ships, though sleek and alien, seemed to hum with a kind of dark energy, each movement precise, controlled, and deliberate. Earth's fleet had barely made it out of orbit before the Joreth opened fire. Ruiz's hand tightened on the command console as the enemy ships unleashed a barrage of deadly energy blasts. Earth's warships retaliated, their powerful energy cannons roaring in response. But the alien ships, larger, faster, and seemingly impervious to their fire, dodged the blasts effortlessly. One of Earth's smaller vessels took a direct hit, its shields flaring in a blinding explosion before the ship began to disintegrate in the vacuum of space. It was the first loss of the war, and it sent a cold shiver through the fleet. "Damage report," Ruiz ordered, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We've taken hits to the starboard side, Commander," Lieutenant Renner replied quickly. "Shields are holding, but we're losing power in some sections. If they keep this up, we'll be sitting ducks out here." Ruiz cursed under her breath. The Joreth were clearly toying with them, testing their defenses. She could see the way their ships maneuvered, smooth and effortless, as if they had studied human tactics and knew exactly how to exploit their weaknesses. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were learning, adapting, anticipating every move the humans made. Another volley of fire struck the fleet, this time hitting the bridge of the U.S. Perseverance, the flagship of Earth's war fleet. The ship's main communications array exploded in a burst of light, cutting off the fleet's central command center. For a split second, Ruiz thought they were done for. But then, something remarkable happened. "Commander, they're breaking formation," Lieutenant Lai exclaimed, her voice laced with disbelief. "The Joreth are scattering." Ruiz narrowed her eyes, studying the battlefield. The Joreth ships, which had been advancing in tight formation, were now splitting up. Some were veering off, heading for Earth's ships, while others seemed to be retreating or performing evasive maneuvers. It didn't make sense. Why would they pull back when they had the upper hand? "Prepare for a counterattack," Ruiz barked. "They're not retreating. They're testing us again." She was right. The Joreth ships were testing their response time, probing for weaknesses. As the Joreth regrouped, Commander Ruiz made a bold decision. "We're going to hit them before they regroup fully," she said firmly. "Weapons officer, focus fire on their lead ship. We're taking that one down." The next few moments were a blur of chaotic commands, flashing lights, and the deafening roar of weapons. The fleet concentrated fire on the largest of the Joreth vessels, a sleek behemoth that appeared to be the command center of their invasion force. Earth's warships unleashed a relentless barrage of energy blasts, targeting the weak points in the enemy's armor. The battle was intense, with the Joreth retaliating in kind, but for the first time, Earth's fleet was gaining ground. The Joreth flagship took several hits, its shields flickering dangerously. But the alien ships weren't helpless. A massive energy wave erupted from the flagship, sending shockwaves through space, knocking Earth's ships off course. A smaller vessel, the ISS Vanguard, was caught in the blast, its shields failing under the sheer force of the impact. The ship spun out of control, spiraling toward the dark void of space. "Vanguard is lost," Lieutenant Renner reported grimly. "We've lost all contact." Ruiz's jaw tightened, but she didn't allow herself the luxury of grief. The war had begun, and there was no time for mourning. "Keep fighting," she commanded, her voice resolute. "We can't let them think we're weak." In the heart of the chaos, something unexpected happened. The Zoreth flagship, crippled but still functional, suddenly stopped firing. A tense silence fell over the battlefield as Earth's fleet, weapons poised, waited for the next move. The Zoreth were clearly regrouping, reassessing their strategy. But what were they waiting for? And why had they ceased their attack? Then, without warning, a new signal crackled through the fleet's communications. It was a message, transmitted in the same frequency as the one that had first reached Earth. The words that followed were chilling. Impressive. You fight well. But this is only the beginning. The fleet braced itself for whatever came next. The Zoreth were no longer just invaders. They were a force that had been sent to break Earth's will. And though Earth's fleet had managed to land the first blow, the true war was only just beginning. The message sent by the Zoreth flagship echoed in Commander Amelia Ruiz's mind. Impressive. You fight well. But this is only the beginning. The words were cold, dismissive. And yet there was something more. An unsettling sense of acknowledgement. They had underestimated humanity's will to fight. But that wasn't the end. It was merely the opening move in a game that would test everything Earth had. As the Zoreth ships receded into the blackness of space, Earth's war fleet held its position. The eerie silence that followed the message was almost unbearable. No more enemy fire. No more movement. Just the haunting stillness of space. Ruiz stared at the stars outside the command deck window, her mind racing. What did they mean by only the beginning? She murmured under her breath. They had been able to land a few strikes on the Zoreth flagship, but it wasn't enough. The loss of the Vanguard weighed heavily on her shoulders. One ship, one crew, lost in an instant. It felt like a preview of what was to come. Commander, Lieutenant Renner interrupted, his voice tense. We've received a new set of data from Earth's observatories. There's a massive fleet forming just beyond the outer edge of the system. It looks like the Zoreth are regrouping. Ruiz's heart sank. The Zoreth weren't retreating. They were preparing for something bigger, something more coordinated. Their first strike had been a test, and now they were coming in full force. Any estimates on their numbers? Ruiz asked, turning to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Jason Parks. Hundreds of ships, Commander. Some of them are far larger than the ones we've seen before, Parks replied, his fingers dancing across his console. They're massing together, forming a blockade. We can't just engage them head-on like we did before. We'll be outnumbered and outgunned. Ruiz took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising sense of dread that was threatening to overwhelm her. We need to get ahead of them, she said, her voice firm. Find a way to break their formation before they come in full force. We can't afford to let them dictate the terms of this battle. Her mind raced with the possibilities. The Zoreth were a formidable enemy, but Earth's fleet wasn't without its advantages. If they could catch the Zoreth off guard, perhaps they could exploit their weaknesses. But the clock was ticking. The Zoreth weren't going to wait forever. Suddenly, an alert flashed across the screen. A new wave of Zoreth ships was closing in fast, their weapons primed and ready. The battle was about to begin again. Move the fleet to intercept, Ruiz ordered, but this time stay spread out. Don't give them a chance to hit us all at once. We'll engage them from multiple angles. The fleet shifted position, each ship moving with precision as they scattered, ready to strike at the Zoreth from unexpected directions. The tactical plan was risky, but Ruiz knew they had no choice. If they could break the enemy's formation, they might be able to separate the weaker ships from the more powerful ones. But it would be a delicate maneuver. One misstep, and the entire fleet could be wiped out. As Earth's ships moved into position, Ruiz's eyes never left the main screen. The Zoreth were fast, efficient, their movements almost predatory. The distance between the two fleets closed quickly, and Ruiz could see the enemy ships now, larger, more menacing than the ones they had encountered before. It was as if the Zoreth had come prepared for a true confrontation, bringing their full strength to bear. Here they come, Lieutenant Lai said, her voice tight with tension. Brace for impact. The first wave of enemy fire came in a blinding burst. Energy blasts lashed out, streaking across the vacuum of space, targeting Earth's lead ships. But Ruse was ready. She barked orders to her fleet, and the ships scattered in a series of evasive maneuvers, narrowly dodging the blasts. "We've got them on the run," Parks said, watching the enemy ships pull back slightly in confusion. "It's working, Commander." They weren't expecting this kind of movement. For a fleeting moment, it seemed like they might have gained the upper hand. The Zhoreth had underestimated humanity's adaptability and determination. Earth's warships fired back, their blasts finding their marks and sending enemy ships spiraling into space. But just as quickly, the Zhoreth adapted. A new wave of fire erupted from the enemy ships, this time more concentrated, more precise. They had learned. They were adapting faster than Ruiz could have anticipated. "Commander," Renner shouted, "we've got a large energy signature coming from the Zhoreth flagship. It's building up. Something big is coming." Ruiz's stomach dropped. "Get us out of range." Full evasive maneuvers. But it was too late. The Zhoreth flagship released a pulse of energy unlike anything Earth's fleet had ever encountered. The shockwave hit with such force that the entire fleet shook, sending ships careening off course. A second later, the flagship fired, releasing a devastating blast that cut through the heart of Earth's formation, vaporizing several ships in its path. Multiple casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Parks shouted, his voice cracking. "We've lost the U.S. Horizon and the TSS Sentinel. Shields are failing on the rest of the fleet." Earth's war fleet had just received a brutal lesson in the Zhoreth's true power. The battle was far from over, but with each passing second, it was becoming clear. Humanity was in for the fight of its life. The shockwave from the Zhoreth flagship reverberated through space like a violent, unseen hand, shaking Earth's fleet to its core. Commander Amelia Ruiz's eyes widened as she watched the destruction unfold on the main screen. The U.S. Horizon and the TSS Sentinel, two of the fleet's most advanced ships, had been obliterated in an instant. The Zhoreth flagship had released a concentrated energy blast so powerful that it tore through the heart of Earth's formation, leaving only debris and the smoldering remains of ships. "Status report." Ruse barked, her voice laced with urgency, even as the cold reality of the situation set in. "We've lost 2 ships, Commander," Lieutenant Colonel Jason Parks replied grimly. "The remaining vessels are damaged but still operational. Shields are fluctuating, and the AI defense systems are struggling to adapt to the Zhoreth's tactics. Redirect all fire towards their flagship," Ruse ordered without hesitation. "We need to take it down before they get another shot like that." But as Earth's fleet regrouped, it became clear that the Zhoreth had anticipated this. The enemy ships, once scattered and disorganized, were now forming a more coherent, strategic formation. They moved with deadly precision, responding faster than Ruiz's team could react. Each time Earth's ships dodged one attack, the Zhoreth would land another blow, keeping them off balance. They weren't just invaders, they were masters of war. "We need to turn the tide," Ruiz muttered under her breath. The loss of the Horizon and Sentinel was devastating, but it wasn't time for despair. Earth's fleet still had one advantage: the will to fight, the grit to survive. But it would require a level of strategy and unity that they hadn't yet reached. "Commander, we've identified a weak point in their formation," Lieutenant Sarah Lai called from the communications console. "Their ships are clustered around the flagship, but there's a gap on the right flank. If we can break through, we might be able to hit them where it hurts." Ruiz's mind raced. The Zhoreth had clearly underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. And now, Earth's fleet had a chance to exploit that. The enemy had expected Earth's forces to engage in a traditional firefight, but Ruiz was determined to think outside the box. This battle wasn't about brute force, it was about outsmarting the enemy. "Helm, take us to the right flank," Ruiz ordered. "Weapons officer, prepare a concentrated strike. All ships, form up and get into position. This is our chance to punch through. The fleet, battered but not broken, shifted positions in a series of quick, coordinated maneuvers. The Zorith fleet, while impressive in its firepower, was now caught off guard. They hadn't expected the humans to break from the standard tactics, and that small gap in their formation was the opening Earth's fleet needed. For a moment, Ruiz held her breath as the fleet approached the gap. If they could break through, they might be able to disrupt the Zorith's offensive and target their flagship, which appeared to be the source of their devastating energy pulses. It was a dangerous move, but it was the only chance they had left. "We're in position, Commander," Lieutenant Renner confirmed. "Fire." The fleet unleashed a coordinated volley of energy blasts, each shot aimed directly at the Zorith ships in the right flank. For a brief moment, it felt like the very fabric of space itself was shaking as the beams collided with the enemy's shields, sending sparks flying and explosions rippling across the battlefield. The Zorith flagship returned fire, but Earth's ships were already moving, weaving through the oncoming blasts with calculated precision. The human fleet had punched through the gap, and now the Zorith were scrambling to adapt. The smaller enemy ships on the right flank were falling back, leaving the flagship more exposed. Direct hit on the Zorith flagship's shields. Parks shouted over the comms. "Their shields are weakening." Ruiz's heart raced. The strategy was working, but they couldn't let up. The Zorith would adapt, and they needed to strike before the flagship could retaliate. She turned to the weapons officer. "All remaining firepower. Target the flagship's core. Now." Another wave of energy blasts shot toward the Zorith flagship, this time focused on the heart of the ship. The blast impacted with a violent explosion, sending shockwaves through the alien vessel. For the first time since the battle began, the flagship's shields flickered and failed. "Yes," Lieutenant Renner shouted, a note of triumph in his voice. "We've breached their defenses. The core's exposed. Keep the pressure on them." Ruiz commanded. "This is our moment." Earth's warships fired relentlessly, aiming for the now vulnerable core of the Zorith flagship. The enemy retaliated, but it was clear they were losing control of the situation. The once cohesive Zorith fleet was falling apart, their ships scattering as the flagship began to crack under the pressure. And then, as if the universe itself were holding its breath, a massive explosion erupted from within the Zorith flagship. The ship trembled violently before breaking apart, pieces of debris flying into the void. It was a devastating blow to the Zorith's command structure, and the remaining enemy ships faltered in the wake of their flagship's destruction. "Flagship destroyed," Lieutenant Lai cried out in disbelief. "We did it, Commander. We actually did it." Ruiz felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she didn't allow herself to celebrate. The battle was far from over. The Zorith had lost their flagship, but their forces were still formidable, and they would likely return with a vengeance. But for now, Earth had won a crucial victory. "We've broken their line," Ruiz said, her voice calm but resolute. "But this is only the first step. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." The destruction of the Zorith flagship was a hard-earned victory for Earth's war fleet, but it was only a temporary respite in the ongoing conflict. The moment a flagship's massive hull disintegrated, the enemy ships surrounding it began to retreat, seemingly disoriented and demoralized. Yet Commander Amelia Ruiz knew better than to let her guard down. The Zorith had shown resilience before, and this retreat could be nothing more than a feint, a calculated move to regroup and strike with even more force. The fleet held its position, still battered from the assault but alive, still capable of fighting back. It was a strange moment of calm in the aftermath of chaos. Earth's fleet had managed to break through the Zorith's most powerful asset, but the enemy's strength wasn't just in their ships. It was in their tactics, their relentless pursuit of victory. The Zorith weren't just invaders. They were predators, and they would hunt humanity until Earth was nothing but a distant memory. "Commander," Lieutenant Colonel Jason Parks called, his voice steady but filled with concern. "We've intercepted a Zorith transmission. It's in their native language, but our translators have managed to decode part of it. Ruiz's stomach tightened. What does it say? Parks paused for a moment, reading the decoded message. It's a warning, Commander. The Joreth are mobilizing their entire fleet. They're preparing for a counterattack, one that will bring reinforcements from across the galaxy. They intend to finish what they started. A chill ran down Ruiz's spine. The enemy was not backing down. If anything, they were intensifying their efforts. Earth's fleet was far from invulnerable, and they had just witnessed the devastating power the Joreth could unleash. But they weren't finished. They couldn't be. Not when humanity's very survival was at stake. Then we need to prepare, Ruiz said, her voice tight with resolve. Get our engineers to work on enhancing the fleet's defenses. We've seen what they can do. This time, we can't afford to let them get so close. The crew went into motion, each officer and enlisted personnel fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Every moment mattered. Earth's fleet was the last line of defense, and they would have to withstand whatever the Joreth threw at them next. As the technicians and engineers worked on reinforcing shields, repairing damaged weapon systems, and recalibrating targeting arrays, Ruiz spent the long hours strategizing with her senior officers. The Joreth were regrouping, yes, but so was Earth's fleet. They would not be caught off guard again. We need to keep them from closing in on Earth, Lieutenant Sarah Lai said, tapping away at her console. We can't allow them to get within striking distance of the planet. If they do, it's game over. Ruiz nodded. Agreed. We'll set up a defensive perimeter around Earth. We'll make it clear that they won't get any closer. But as the officers continued to discuss tactics, Ruiz couldn't shake the growing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. The Joreth were relentless, and no matter how much Earth's fleet prepared, there was a limit to what they could endure. She had to think bigger, think faster. They needed a way to break the Joreth's momentum entirely. She turned to Lieutenant Colonel Parks. What's the status of the deep space weapons we've been developing? Are they ready for deployment? Parks hesitated. They're still in the final testing phase, Commander. They're not quite ready for full-scale combat, but they could be the key to turning this around. If we can use them to hit the Joreth from a distance, it might give us the edge we need. Ruiz considered this for a moment. The deep space weapons were humanity's last, best hope to keep the Joreth at bay. If they worked, they could devastate the enemy long before the Joreth fleet reached Earth. But it was risky. The weapons were still experimental, untested in the field, and any failure could spell disaster. We don't have the luxury of time, Ruiz said finally, her decision made. Deploy them as soon as possible. We'll use them to disrupt the Joreth's advance before they even get close. The crew sprang into action, finalizing the preparations for the deployment of the deep space weapons. Earth's fleet took up their positions in the outer reaches of the solar system, ready to engage the Joreth head-on if necessary. The tension in the air was palpable, each person aware that the fate of humanity now hinged on these next moments. As the deep space weapons powered up, a single thought echoed in Ruiz's mind. This was their best shot, but it could also be their last. They had to strike hard, strike fast, and hope that the Joreth wouldn't have time to adapt. Stand by, Ruiz said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. We're not just defending Earth. We're fighting for the future of humanity. And we will win. The Joreth had pushed humanity to the brink, but Commander Ruiz knew this was the turning point. The battle for Earth's survival was far from over. But now, Earth's fleet had a chance to shift the odds in their favor. The tension aboard Earth's war fleet was unbearable. Every officer, every crew member, was acutely aware that the next moments would decide the fate of humanity. The Joreth, relentless in their pursuit, had gathered their full strength, and the first wave of reinforcements was already closing in. The deep space weapons had been deployed, their systems primed and ready, but the question remained, would they work? Would they be enough to stop the Joreth from reaching Earth? Commander Amelia Ruiz stood at the command center, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as she stared at the vast expanse of space before her. Through the viewports, Earth's blue and green surface was a distant, fragile beacon of life. Every thought in her mind was focused on one thing. They had to hold the line. "Commander," Lieutenant Colonel Parks called, his voice sharp with urgency. "We're picking up Zoreth ships at the edge of the system. Multiple capital ships, and they're advancing rapidly." Ruiz turned to face him. "How much time do we have?" 20 minutes at most before they reach the planetary defense perimeter," Parks replied. "We're going to need all the firepower we can muster to keep them at bay." Ruiz nodded grimly. The deep space weapons were their first line of defense, but she knew they couldn't rely on them alone. If the Zoreth adapted, as they had done before, Earth's fleet would have to be ready for whatever came next. "Lieutenant Lai, prepare the fleet for an all-out engagement," Ruiz ordered. "We'll engage them head-on. No more holding back." A chorus of acknowledgments rang out as officers prepared for the inevitable clash. Ruiz could feel the weight of the command settle on her shoulders. This was the final stand, the moment that would define the future of humanity. "Commander," Lieutenant Renner called from his station. "We've got confirmation. The deep space weapons are online and ready. But we've only got one shot at this. If we miss, they'll have a clear path to Earth." Ruiz's heart raced. One shot. It was the gamble of a lifetime. The entire fleet's survival depended on the success of a single powerful strike. "Then we make it count," she said, her voice steady but resolute. The first of the Zoreth ships appeared on the radar, massive, imposing, and seemingly unstoppable. Earth's fleet had no time to waste. Ruiz gave the signal, and the fleet moved into position, their weapons primed for a full-scale assault. "We're within range," Lieutenant Colonel Parks called. "Weapons are ready to fire." "Do it," Ruiz ordered. The fleet unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, every ship in the formation targeting the oncoming Zoreth ships. The weapons discharged with a thunderous roar, sending powerful waves of energy streaking through space, each shot finding its mark. The Zoreth capital ships returned fire, their energy blasts streaking across the sky like angry comets, but Earth's fleet held firm, their shields absorbing the blows and retaliating with equal ferocity. For a moment, it seemed like Earth's fleet might be able to hold the line. The Zoreth ships were powerful, but humanity's fleet was fighting with everything they had, every ounce of their will to survive driving them forward. But then, the Zoreth flagship appeared, looming larger than any ship Ruiz had ever seen. It was a behemoth, its dark hull gleaming in the distant light of the stars, and it was charging directly at Earth's fleet, ready to unleash the full force of its weapons. "Commander," Lieutenant Renner warned, his voice filled with alarm. "The flagship is charging its main cannon. It's going to fire." Ruiz's mind raced. She knew what that weapon could do. It was the same type of energy pulse that had decimated their formation earlier in the battle. If they didn't stop it now, Earth's fleet would be obliterated in an instant. "Lieutenant Lai, target the flagship's cannon," Ruiz ordered. "We need to disable it before it fires. All ships, concentrate fire on that weapon." The fleet fired in unison, their energy blasts targeting the enormous cannon at the heart of the Zoreth flagship. The enemy ship retaliated with a wave of fire that shook the varied fabric of space, but Earth's ships refused to back down. The blasts found their mark, and for a moment, Ruiz thought they might succeed. And then the unthinkable happened. A massive pulse of energy shot out from the Zoreth flagship's cannon, slamming into the fleet's formation with the force of a star-gone supernova. Ships were thrown back, their shields failing in an instant, and entire vessels were torn apart in the ensuing blast. The shockwave reverberated through space, knocking out communication systems and sending the fleet into chaos. "Damage report," Ruiz shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. "We've lost half the fleet, Commander," Lieutenant Colonel Parks shouted. "Shields are down across the board. We're not going to survive another blast like that." Ruiz's heart sank. They were on the brink of defeat. But then, a glimmer of hope appeared. The deep space weapons had been deployed, and the Joreth flagship's own energy signature began to spike. It was now or never. "Fire the deep space weapons now," Ruiz commanded, her voice fierce. The massive energy cannons fired, their beams stretching across the vast expanse of space, striking the Joreth flagship with a tremendous force. The flagship groaned, its shields buckling under the weight of the blast. For a moment, everything stopped. The battle paused as the flagship seemed to teeter on the edge of destruction. And then, with a final, cataclysmic explosion, the Joreth flagship shattered, its massive hull disintegrating into nothingness. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in hours, Commander Ruiz allowed herself a breath. The Joreth flagship was gone, and with it, the backbone of the enemy's fleet. Earth had won. But as the smoke of battle cleared, Ruiz knew this victory was just the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. The war was over for now, and humanity had survived.